Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the Fatherhood Authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to another inspiring episode of I Am Dad podcast. Today we are honored to have with us a true trailblazer in the field of fatherhood advocacy, Mr. Kelly R. Little. Kelly is a dynamic speaker, a fatherhood expert who has dedicated his life to empowering fathers and transforming communities through emotional intelligence and holistic healing. As the founder of Fatherhood University365 and a certified leader in father engagement, Kelly's innovative approach has bridged the gap between young people and mature male role models, helping fathers across the U.S. and abroad to reconnect with their families. Named the 2023 Fatherhood Trailblazer of the Year and now the 2024 International Fatherhood Legacy Leader, he is a mentor, and his work continues to inspire positive change one father at a time. So today, let's bring into the space my good friend, Mr. Kelly Little. How you doing, sir?
Man, peace and blessings, Brother Ken. How you doing, family?
Man, I'm doing good. I can't, as a spade player would say, I can't call it. I'm just gonna play the hand dealt to me. See how this works out. See how my partner plays with me. So that's how we gonna get down today. Listen, we start our podcast off with, an inspiring, insightful question or comment or story from you, because I think it gives context, to the people that I'm talking to, and in this case, you. Tell me your daddy story.
Oh man, this is a deep one, Ken. Let me say this. Um, I've never met, never seen my father.
Mm,
My sister's father, uh, although he didn't live with us, he's been an inspirational part of my life. But the last 10 years, I went the genealogy route to connect with that side of my family and found out a video I watched probably 40 times called A Prince Among Slaves. That's my paternal lineage. And that prince stolen from Guinea, brought to Natchez, Mississippi, is the legacy that I come from. So that story really drives my inspiration in working with dads and
hmm
allows me to feel connected because I don't know my father's story. And so anger turned into
mm
understanding as
mm
I grew and matured. So that's that's the fatherhood story on that end. On the other end, me being the father to two daughters, 20, get ready to be 21, and 22, get ready to be 23, and being around you, David, Patrick, Eugene, and all the icons in this space allows me to continue to father them in a very powerful way, to support them, to encourage them. As I was just at USC, supporting my daughter during Family Day last week. So,
Nice. Nice. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, because I often tell people that, while you may not have a father in your life, all of us have a daddy story. And that's daddy story looks different for all of us. That's why I never prompt people on how to answer it. I just say, what's your story? Because your story is your story. If you got to stand up and tell the world your daddy's story, that's how you tell it. Right. And I don't prompt you to tell a story that I think is going to be either negative or positive. Our story is our story. Right. It is who we are. And it gives me perspective on who you are. The other thing I like to prompt people on is because it's always interesting when I'm talking to folks who specifically work in this field of fatherhood, is the journey and the inspiration, right? Because everybody has their own inspiration for the work that they do. Talk a little bit about that inspiration and your journey into the space.
look, the journey is probably, for me, the most important thing that I've came into alignment with. And that journey allowed me to recognize and remember all the powerful people who played an integral role the great uncles, watching my grandfather in North Carolina, former military guy like both you and I. Uh, and he had all these kids. He supported all these kids. He amassed over 100 acres of land in North Carolina. But watching how he connected with each of his children and his grandchildren pushed me at a very early age to be what they call, an old spirit. And that old spirit was connecting first. We got to have the quantitative and qualitative data, but those relationships are the things that help men to really step up into what they understand and know what they need for the people and families that they're responsible for. So as we walk down that space, just putting myself in position to appreciate every moment and not just be present, but be present with presence. That's what drives me every single day, to know that we get to impact not only the father, but the father's children's children.
Thanks for sharing that. Because we must have the same kin in North Carolina, because my great uncle, always we forget how many greats are in front of that, also amassed a large quantity of land, 250 acres of land outside of Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and our
Mm,
family still owns most of that land today. For 14 to 15 years of my life, my mother put me on a Greyhound Trailways bus in New York City and sent me to the farm to work on that farm with the rest of the family. Tobacco. So when I tell people I harvest tobacco, pull corn, fed hogs, slap
yep.
all that, people like, well, you did what? I was like, yeah, that was, where I, learned most of what I knew from men, from my uncle, and my cousins. But we also share another similar background in the space, to which I also served this country in the Army. And I went into the Army because my favorite cousin, who passed away in the Army, went to the Army. Everything that my cousin Al did, I wanted to do. Everything from owning a 76, Chevy Nova and hopping it up, going into the military, having an afro, being cool with the girls, being an Omega, which I never did, but he became that and I didn't know, and going into the Army. And I tried to do everything he did. Talk a little bit about, and I know why I went into the military, because I was looking for a fulfillment of male presence in my life, because I did not have my father in my life. And, back then they had this tag, be all you can be. And I
Hmm.
thought that if I went into the military, that they would treat me or teach me how to be a man. And they did to a certain extent, but it still didn't fill the void of what I was looking for. And that was my father in my life. Talk a little bit about how that history and how your being in the U.S. military helps shape how you think about A, being a man, and then B, being a father.
I think you hammered it, and very similar. I had an older cousin. He's probably 67 now, who went into the Air Force, and
Mm,
so I almost did the Air Force, but I chose the right choice. So I went into the Army, and my experience and my exposure from the military really kind of gave me a different view of manhood, because there was this discipline piece that, I grew up in the 80s, so it's round fade. They cut my hair off. I almost feel like, wow, they just kind of completely demasculated. But really, what they did was they broke you down to build you back up. And
mm,
so that's the work that I feel like uh, was influenced by the military. No matter what struggle I went through, really, it was really in preparation for me to continue to elevate who I was. It exposed me to different places. It gave me more culture, more understanding. Now I want to talk about all the deployments I went through and what that did to me. But it definitely positioned me to look at men and fathers very differently, as I seen how fathers of different ethnicities and then how things operated in different countries. it just expanded my view of what comprehensive manhood was, what fatherhood, and then realizing that we all face some of the same challenges across countries. That was a
Hmm.
powerful thing for me.
Right.
I'm in South America and seeing stuff that are some of the same struggles we face here. And I
Hmm.
think that was a very pivotal moment in my life. And I did between active duty and the guard over close to 26 years in the military.
Wow. How much of that, the characteristics that you built in the military, do you still like rely on today?
I think a lot of it. I think for me, like you, Ken, New York guy, I was a Philly guy, and like so the one that breaking me down wasn't really gonna work because I felt like I was built from a different cloth already, and we have a different kind of confidence. Um, but like you everybody's a mechanic in the military because when something breaks down, you gotta fix it, and so
Hmm.
that really helps shape and sculpt my thought process around, okay, this is not a problem, this is an opportunity, which is how I see you even attacking everything in fatherhood, right? Your wheels are always spinning to solutions and bringing in people. As a military, the Army is one of the branches that no matter what situation you find yourself in, you understand you got other people who have other duties, and so we focus on what our responsibility and trust that the other folk will do their job so that we can complete the mission. And that's why I stay true to my space in fatherhood and don't allow other distractions that other people want to pour you in to pull
Hmm.
me away from the work that we
Hmm.
were purposed to do in this universe.
Yeah, yeah. I always forget. I always have to remind myself sometimes that I have these characteristics that were developed in me in the military, organization being one of them, right? Being organized, like used to drive us crazy, right? Shoes got to be turned the right way. Your buttons or the line on your shirt got to match the line on your pants. Your belt buckle got to be a certain way. The sheets got to be. It's like, come on, what we doing here? Like, but then you be realize that that's about being organized. That's about knowing what things are in your life and also realizing when things are not in place, right? When you're an organized person and something is out of place, you see it immediately because it's not in the space of the way that you organize. But one of the things I often hear, from guys who went into the military, when I'll say organizing, some people will say discipline. How much are how disciplined are you now? From when you were in the military.
Oh, extremely disciplined. I still do 90-degree angles in my bed. Right? And, but Ken, the funny thing is, when you talk about leadership, what the you come in as an E3 or E4, and you're responsible for the lives of a whole community.
Right.
So as you're moving and operating in this fatherhood space, I don't care whoever's not in alignment, it's not really opposition because you know what your mission is. You stay focused on that mission. But
Yeah.
then back to that organization piece you talked about, you learn regulations. I still remember AR 670-1, like it's whatever. And I study every manual the same way. Uh,
Mm.
and that allows you to compete a little bit with an attorney when it comes to how you advocate for men and fathers because there's a policy somewhere that may give a viable argument against the attorney's legal comments and help
Hmm.
fathers kind of navigate that. So, um,
Yeah. Wow. That leads right into Fatherhood University 365 because I know you've taken some of all of that and poured it right into that curriculum. Talk to me about Fatherhood University 365. How did you come up with it? And talk to me a little bit about, some of the components within it.
so what I would love to say is that again, being connected to brilliant people and brilliant minds is always about how do we expand capacity to be able to help men and fathers, ultimately helping families. And we do that by being curious.
Mm.
And we got curriculums out there, but do them curriculums lean into the culture of the community that you are in? And so what I found is that COVID 2019, a lot of people were impacted by something that wasn't sexy at the moment, which was mental health.
Mm.
I added emotional intelligence and the concentration and focus on us as an individual first, and not the external person, but the internal person, so that we can help men regulate those emotions, thus leveraging the same space to regulate those who are around them. That curriculum touches on all the core principles of what manhood is, but looking at manhood from the perspective of a comprehensive component to not only fatherhood, but how we nurture, because they say we providers and protectors.
Mm-hmm.
That's typically what we supposed to embrace.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, okay, if you want to give me that, I'm going to say I'm a provider of them in the educational space. I'm going to physically protect them. I am going to financially protect them. We're going to have conversations around preeclampsia. We're going to have conversations around postpartum, because men can get postpartum too. And
Mm-hmm.
then creating healthy spaces. People love to use safe space. I'm going to take it a little further and say brave space, because
Mm-hmm.
we also have to call out BS when we see BS, because
Mm-hmm.
our job is to raise the bar of who you are and what you see as possible, so that when Kenneth Braswell is no longer running you through this process, back to what you just said about the military, all those lessons and themes that you built up into those men become muscle memory, and they
Mm-hmm.
remember the left brain, Kenneth Braswell, that's an analytical thinker, that's a creator, that's an innovator, and all that was dumped up into that curriculum, so that we do these, we practically apply them, and then we create support groups and networks, so that men not only can live, breathe, eat, and sleep, all those things I just talked about, but then they get to have intergenerational conversations with their children and sometimes their grandchildren in the Father's Haven, which is the support element of Fatherhood University 365, so that we are now modeling it, and what children see, children become,
Mm-hmm.
and it changes the scope and narrative of what is possible to nothing is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Nice.
very heavy on first piece, which is I know it's a space that you love, which is the research. Right, we
Yeah.
got to get beyond just what we feel, because when Kenneth Braswell or Kelly Little is no longer here, and they were great leaders, if they didn't leave policy in place to continue on the legacy of the work they did, then everything we did is in vain.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about that. I've been doing a lot of, I had to speak um, about a month or so ago in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Ooh.
And the subject matter that they wanted me to speak about was fathers as freedom riders in the education of their children. And when they first told me about that, I was like, man, that's a little off topic, but you can talk about anything as it relates to fathers. So it took me a minute to kind of really think about it. And then after I started reading and researching around freedom riders, the thing that popped up for me as I read these things is many of the civil rights advancements or the motivation to do something that stimulated civil rights advancements took place by a father on behalf of their children, right? So when you think about Little Rock Central University, um, it was a dad. No, let me back up. Let's go to Brown versus Board of Education,
Mm.
because it was Oliver Brown who was the dad of Linda Brown, which I think was his daughter. He was just trying to make sure that his daughter was able to go to the school to which he had bought his house. That was his only thing. I'm moving up. I got this house. I want my daughter to go to this house. I don't want her to go all the way across town to the school that she was attached to. She should be able to go into this particular school. But because of that, it stimulated bigger questions, which is, why does she have to go back across town? And how does this look everywhere else? And that stimulated, which is why he became the lead plaintiff in Brown versus Board of Education. And so when you go back and you look at Martin Luther King and you look at Malcolm X and you look at Frederick Douglass, who was also a dad, and you look at all of these kind of freedom fighters who were men, not to say that women weren't doing something, but men were stimulated by the access that they were trying to do or accomplish for their children, right? And it's just a really, and we don't talk enough about, how we show up. So when you talk about those tools and those legacies that you're leaving behind for these fathers, it really has a lot to do that you want them to know that, yeah, you can advance all of these other things, but at the end of the day, you got to be a leader and a freedom fighter in your own household, right? So when you think about the curriculum, like, what is the emotion? Because you talk about emotional intelligence. What's the number one emotion that men have to know more about? I was going to say control, and I don't like the word control, but
Mm.
what is the emotion that they have to know more about in order to make it something that is positive for them and not negative?
Wow, that's a nice question. And what I would say is learning to control our anger,
Mm,
but more so being curious about why we are angry. Um,
mm,
you said something earlier. When we think military and we talk discipline, I can't have that conversation without remembering or recalling that everything that is in my subconscious mind is tied to programming from television or the radio. So we do things so second nature or muscle memory, as we would say in the military. So, what's the muscle memory of men? And what I know, when I used to go to the school, they look at me like I need to give an excuse why I'm here checking up on my daughters, as
right,
if I don't play a vital role in their lives when I am with their mother.
right.
Or when I'm at the hospital and you send me a bill, yet you don't want to talk to me about her physical health in this moment. And
Right.
so it used to anger me. Then I realized I was angry because I felt disrespected. And so that thought then turned into an action. And now my action is that let me go ahead and stop this. Your implicit bias is leading you to not recognize and see that I am a valuable entity in this child's life. And so, doctor, today I'm stopping you and I'm going to tell you that you can't treat me like that because I have agency over me. And the precedent that I set is the precedent that you will now have to respond to with any man who comes into your hospital. And so that's one thing. But being cognizant of where your own implicit bias is and
Mhm,
how you step to the table. And we got to be honest, like, even when I deal with men who are navigating, let's say use child support, for example.
mhm,
Oh, she look, let y'all co-parents. And so you can't control her, but love will always trump somebody else who's operating from anger. And
mhm,
so helping them to again make sure they make choices while also being aware of their own emotions. And so again, I use anger, but then for somebody else, it might be fear.
mm,
And so really making sure we prioritize that if we went to school and you got many skills and gifts, which means you spent many hours in photography, in editing, in
mm,
music, and all the different genres, social work. I ask every man, how much time do you spend learning who you are and specializing in you so that
mm,
when emotions come up, you know why the emotions coming up. That allows you to take a breath, relax, and then become in control of said motion so that you're operating not solely out of the emotion, but operating from the perspective of what result are you trying to accomplish.
Hmm.
And sometimes that'll ground you a lot more than making but than being reactive, but
Hmm.
being responsive.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who get into, this work or who may be even on the outside looking in think that this stuff is rocket science. It's not. It's common sense, right? And common sense to which we should have developed within our own homes. And so now we're having to back in and create common sense where unrealistic logic is the driver, right? And so when you're talking to fathers, what is the thing that frustrates you the most with trying to get to them?
Exactly what you said, the irrational logic. And so for me, it's all right, now we got to get some context. And I had to have some conversation because he's got to be stuck in a development stage somewhere. And so after we start having conversation and I ask questions, I'm not telling him anything. What I'm doing is I'm just probing because he'll walk himself into realizing, well, that's not really. I'll use a perfect example. One guy, he's so mad at the mother because she's acting a certain way. So as I'm asking the questions, he told me she was on medication. She was diagnosed as being bipolar, and there was another diagnosis. I said, so why are you mad at her if you said she's not taking the medication and she's experiencing these two issues? Is it rational to think that without taking the medication and what she's dealing with, that she wouldn't respond that way?
Right.
So, so how do you give control to somebody else, giving your emotions away and your power away?
Right.
And this brother always had a lot to say. He stopped. He said, "Wow, I never thought of it that way." And what is it doing to your child or your children? Because at the end of the day, I got to get out my emotions and my feelings and prioritize those young people who we are supposed to be preparing to navigate this journey we call life when we're no longer here.
Yeah. And it always that I love that analogy because it's one of the things, that we do, but it also raises this epiphany when it comes to doing fatherhood work. That the same thing that we tell our fathers that is important for them and their children, which is presence, which is always being there, is the same thing that is the principle in working with fathers, which is presence plus time. Like working with these fathers, you got to be available for them when they are ready to ask for help or need help. And then when they come to you, you have to have time in order to be able to break down and extract what you just talked about because they have to come to their own epiphany about the way that they're thinking. The space that I use it in is, particularly with brothers who come home from incarceration after long periods of time, and they are complaining about, which we're going to walk into this conversation about child support orders, and they're getting the poverty level of, $25 a week, depending on what state you are around the country. And they're complaining about child support. And I'm like, dude, like, for real, we arguing about $25, possibly $250 a week. Do you actually know how much milk costs, how much bread costs, how much daycare costs, how much gas costs, how much rent costs, and then you start going down these things. And like, so really, I'm supposed to sit here and listen to you complain about $250 because she won't tell you how she's spending it, and she has a new man in her house that you don't like, and we're gonna have a conversation about $250. And like when you do that to them, it's like, oh, word, for real, yeah, for real, and you are willing to go to jail in protest of paying $25 a week. That's what you are saying that you're willing to do understanding that that explanation one day has to be given to your child one way or the other. It might not be given in that language, but in the back of your mind, when your child is mad because you spent almost no time with them, you have to calculate in your mind that I stayed away from my kid really because I didn't want to give her mother $250 a month. When if you're married like you and I go through 250 a day on Uber alone, right? Uber Eats. And
That part.
my barber is going ridiculous. I'm like, yo, dude, what if one industry hasn't changed one iota? It is barbers. Why is my haircut costing $50 when it used to cost $5? I'm trying to understand what are you paying for? Now I get electricity time, I get all that stuff, but it's just comical to kind of think about that. When you think about the fathers that you're working with, what is it that we have to be more mindful with respect to child support? Because I think that that still is the number one pain point for fathers, but not the number one issue.
You know, it's great question again, Ken. So for me, it's two: child support and then access and visitation, which aren't held in the same space, right? And so on the child support end, really helping embrace them. One, the $25, the $50 orders, and but then you got some. I've seen guys who you referred over to a program. We know they're not working yet. They got an order for $1,400. Like
Mm,
so, but for the men, helping them understand. To your point, if I use $25, that's roughly $6 a week. What are we going to do? We can't even get a McDonald's meal with $6
right,
a day.
right.
So having that conversation and really spending time and breaking down really like what is your issue, helping you to see that like based on the scenario you just gave, that wasn't about the child at all. That's about my pride and my ego, and I don't want to let her win. And oh, by the way, she got a new person, and maybe she's moved on. That's no different. And here's what's funny, Ken. I had in all my years, I've had two women be referred over, and this year was the first year I said, you know what, we gonna roll with it because they experiencing the same thing. Let's see what this perspective does to the men. And they was very upset at first. Now those two women, if they not there, everybody upset. But they brought a different perspective and they were able to give insight in terms of what their mom was doing when she was going through these different things. And so navigating this child support space, one of the bigger things I've noticed, they one know that they got an advocate who's going to speak for them or help them navigate a process, understand the process. But contrary to what most people think, I've learned that they value and appreciate our expert advice in terms of, you know what, how was that working for you? Let's stop a
Mhm.
minute and being able to go back and appreciate it. I had guys say, you know what, they sent me over here and I thought this was going to be the worst thing in the world for me, not them,
Right,
the course. They said this has been the best thing in the world for me because it's changed my perspective. It's
right.
changed my life. My kids have uncles because now they got a support system that's very different. And those guys are the guys that come back and instead of just moving on, they still come back and they actually become an active component of the programs. And some eventually start their own programs, which is advance in our work in the institutional knowledge that's been passed down from a you to whoever, me to whoever. But when you create hope in a group,
Hmm.
you change the ceiling on what can happen. And again, although we're talking child support, helping them to understand because we still support when they're actually in access and visitation court, and to see somebody in there and feel like you're not alone when you're, you know, if we go to court and child support court, you got an attorney, you got caseworkers, and dad's sitting over there by himself.
Right.
Yet their role is to represent what's in the best interest of the child. And
Mhm.
I get one thing, the money is important, but if we secure the money, but we don't secure the impact and the trauma that's caused in the child's life for 12, 15, 10 years of not having presence with dad, uh, it will destroy him from the inside out, destroy her from the inside out. And we know all the research and the data around infant mortality, the morbidity rates, obesity, all those things that should be positive become negative. Those things that what should be negative will become positive because the support system's not there. And the system has historically been built up to essentially oppress us, but moving to today and Commissioner Gray and even Vicky Teresi did an amazing job with the bubble chart. And some of the legacy leaders like what is it, Michigan, they got diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mhm.
So they have stepped their game up tremendously and changed. Most states have changed their name from federal level start first, community support enforcement, to community support services, and helping fathers to realize that they're doing a job. So if we do our job and we do the research and find out how we best position ourselves, then your ability to navigate that system becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, and and it's difficult because when you're working with fathers, you want to get them to understand the system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the system is just so big and so massive. It's really hard to get a dad who's upset about whatever he's upset about to want to hear you talk about the system. His thing is, I just want the system to change because the system right now is serving as a barrier between me and my child. When you think about the systems work and the systems understanding that we have to have, and these dads' needs and desires and wants that they have, what frustrates you the most about doing this work?
Um, First, uh, you got child support as a system, but child support is actually on a TANF grant that's on a social services system. So having fathers actually, and I won't throw access and visitation out. I'm frustrated with the amount of hurdles we have to jump over or evade to be able to move fathers closer to normalizing what should be equitable rights and should focus on behalf of families and children and not just individually. So the lack of legislation and policy shifts and changes that need to occur to create a level playing ground and reducing a little bit of the legal terms that fathers don't understand and the high expenses, particularly around orders that are not right size orders. So the
Mhm.
flexibility that some attorneys have in determining what a father should pay and how it's based on gross income instead of net income. How am I supposed to navigate? Because if you get a second job, they're gonna go after that second job too.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
just a difficult battle. And we need to understand that this has to be revitalized, in my opinion, to be able to create some more equitable opportunities and options.
Mhm.
And we need to take a more active role as systems to figure this out collectively. So, 4A, 4D, and 4E are operating in alignment as opposed to, well, I can only control this. That's not an answer to the solution. That's just
Mhm.
feeding the monster that you call a system. And so, in
Right.
order to rival the system, we got to build a bigger system. So, collectively, um, with that as a challenge, I always offer a solution. As I always see you as well, we have to find ways to create coalitions that minimize and put protective factors in place for
Mhm.
some of these risks that because let me back up a second, Kenny. Once I'll never forget, a guy was going through child support, and then he experienced some issues with Health and Human Services. He left a office and he took his life
Mm.
because of the pressure that was associated with trying to navigate these systems. And we know that we have fathers coming from different cognitive spaces.
Right.
And so, that always will ride with me.
Hmm.
Um, Fortunately, in my mind, we were a benefit in that moment. But if we were collective, the system couldn't have failed it and failed
Yeah.
that child and family.
Hmm. The tragedies of this work is something that we don't talk about a lot, because here in Atlanta, we've had several tragedies that ended in death, for our dads one way or another. And we kind of recognize them when they happen, but we don't lean into them. We probably should lean more into them. I tend to lift up Walter Scott whenever I'm talking about someone who tragically lost their life to a fatherhood related incident. Now, people will say that Walter Scott getting shot and killed in South Carolina was a police incident. Yeah, it happened by police, but the reason that that brother ran is because he thought he was getting ready to be arrested for child support. And my question always has been, why for him was child support so feared that he would rather run from a cop than to turn around, surrender, and deal with the child support? That in and of itself is a question that has to be answered and addressed. And so when you think about that stuff, I want to lean into, because you just kind of touched it, and I want to get a little deeper into this space. There's a lot of conversation about trauma informed care. And how do we do this work in context of understanding trauma, specifically traumas for our fathers? But one of the things that I have issue with, that I've talked about and spoken to a couple of researchers about exploring this, which we will, is that we continue to talk about trauma informed and trauma care, but we have not addressed and named the traumas, right? So for fathers, we don't know the magnitude of the trauma. So if I come to you as a dad and say, Mr. Little, my boy told me to come here and that you work with fathers. I lost my job, and, I'm not really sure where I'm going to live for the next couple of days. My car payments are due, and blah, 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 and I haven't seen my kid in like 2 months. And, I'm arguing with my friends and blah, blah, blah. And then as a case manager, you assess me and say, oh, well, you need a job. That's what you need. Because if you need a job, if I get you a job, you can pay your bills. But you totally dismiss the fact that he said, I haven't seen my child for 2 months. That's a traumatic experience, because everything that he's dealing with could possibly be as a result of not seeing his child, vice versa, and they both could be impacting itself. Because I know if I hadn't seen my child for 2 months, all of that other stuff be damn, right? And I don't care what's happening in my life, because my main thought every day in and out is about the fact that I haven't seen my child. When you think about trauma informed care and trauma in and of itself for the fathers that you work with, how much work do we still have to do with respect to that, and where?
So I think we have to do a tremendous amount of work. Uh, and as you trauma informed, trauma responsive, trauma sensitive, we haven't named the trauma. And then we don't have people who may be case managers, case workers in multiple systems who even understand what adverse childhood experiences are. And
Mm.
so when we have that, or how to balance it, right? You don't have day without night. So if we talk to the trauma, what are the healing centered methodologies to counteract said trauma? And then you really ain't even getting to the trauma, because to your point, we haven't had a real conversation around how you are internalizing what you just shared with me, because I ain't trained to do it.
Right.
Right? And so all we're doing is we're masking and dealing with the symptomology But my primary concern, as I talked earlier, was the focus is on I need to get the bag. The money is what's important. If the kid have the money, no. If the kid don't care anything about money because they don't know about money. All they know is that they feel like, based on what the other person said, well, your dad don't want to be involved. We can't continue to use children as pawns based on this financial piece. We have to make sure that we put strategies in place to ensure that anybody that's operating with children and families, that they become familiar with trauma informed, trauma responsive approaches, but digging deeper and getting granular to find out, right, that I need to acknowledge and validate Kenneth Braswell when he says that, he's struggling right now because he hadn't seen his son or daughter in 2 months. How can I help? What system can I connect you with to, one, prioritize your mental health and emotional wellness, right? Because once I do that, now I get a different lens. So now I'm gonna put my glasses on because I understand how I see people is how I serve people. So if you don't see that, you can't truly serve me as a father who's dealing in pain and grief that I'm not even able to mourn. But you want me to take this next action.
The crazy thing is, as you were saying that, my mind was in, I wonder if people even give the pain value.
Wow. I'm going to tell you why I laugh, because I was in a court the other day. This was in another county. And I heard one of the attorneys say something that really upset me. Well, the courts, Mr. So-and-so, the courts don't care about, and he knows probably that judge, and so he probably was accurate, but you got to care about this man's struggles and what he's trying to navigate. It's one thing if he's trying to avoid. He had a consistent history of paying and paying on time. The organization shut down, and so we got to understand he's grieving the loss of a job. The child is being used to not allow him to be seen as a result of him losing the job. So we're essentially convicting him twice because the organization went out of business. And when we were given dominion over this universe because we're social creatures. When I feel like I'm isolated, I have no support, that means I have no hope. I'm lamenting in that trauma, which puts us into depression. And the next time he go to court, he might be struggling with anxiety.
Right.
And there's nobody there to, in that instance, there was nobody there to hold his hand. Thank God in Atlanta, they got a you, right? We got brothers all across the United States doing this work, but it's not enough of us.
Right.
And again, I'm glad you brought that point up, because I'm a big confrontational person when it comes to, if you just talk to me about trauma and we're not talking about opportunities to balance the trauma with healing centered strategies, then we're doing a disservice, because I got to acknowledge and validate your feelings. And then I need to help prepare you with strategies to help you navigate that, and to continue to put you in a support group to allow you to normalize that sometimes it's okay not to be okay. But I know this is a yeoman share of work, and none of us is Atlas, so we got to either pull that universe off of your shoulders, or all of us need to collectively stand and hold that weight that you're dealing, so you can take a break.
When you look at this space and look at this work, you and I both have not for profits. One of the things that is constantly on my mind as of late is sustainability and longevity. Whether or not Fathers Incorporated will be as effective post Kenneth Braswell, right? And so, because the worst thing we could do as leaders in service of our community is to not be here when people need us the most. And running viable and sustainable and scalable organizations is part of that responsibility. Do you think about that with Fatherhood University?
I think about it every day. One of the things that I love doing is when you see men who navigate the process, and when they get it, making sure that you create space for them to take up space and give back. Because, when Kenneth talks with somebody at 12 o'clock at night and encourages them, they'll never forget that moment. And so they'll be willing to run through a wall for you. And so I make sure that I embrace those guys when they say that, and I create opportunities for them to be more involved, as well as making sure that we bring the right people and put them in the right seat in the organization. And sometimes that means I need to bring guys to budget meetings who never had that experience or that exposure, so
Mm-hmm.
that they know how to do it when Kenneth is in West Virginia or Colorado or California. Our job, much like our job and our role is with our children, with those who we lead, we have a responsibility to make sure that your legacy will always live on, because you prepared people to take this organization to another level. And so that's something that I'm always thinking about, which means I'm always exposing people to new opportunities and introducing them to people, and not trying to be the be all know all of everything, because a leader without nobody following them is definitely not a leader. I mean,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think about that all the time. There's a lot of conversation out there now about young fathers, particularly these Generation Z fathers and these up and coming Alpha Gen dads. How different are these young dads from our more traditional dads?
all right, you gonna have to hit me with that one more time, King. I had to take my glasses on that one.
These young dads that we dealing with right now, these Generation Z dads and these Alpha Gens, these emerging Alpha Gens. How different are these young cats to the more seasoned fathers that you work with?
Look, that's why I had to ask you, say it again. Like, it's night and day. Uh, but what I've learned though, because let's say the '60s, they were a different generation. I've sat down, build relationship, and this is where it's important to bring in and invite them into the fold, so that energy and a lack of attentiveness in certain areas gets nurtured and cultivated with more seasoned elders and some folk who are in the middle, to give them different perspectives. A lot of times it's that current culture, but exposing them to a new culture, have I've seen guys shift ideals just as a result of that, and then later learned that a lot of times they just following the fad that they watched on television, and being around a real man, or somebody who invites different perspectives, have really helped them grow a little bit. So uh, initially, I was a little frustrated with some things, brother. And so I just said, I remember me. Let me go ahead and be slow, be patient. And they're dealing with a different world.
Right,
Let me go ahead and acknowledge some of the strengths,
right.
and not tell them what to do. Say, young brother, I hear you. Have you ever considered this? And just invite them into conversations and see why they're coming from this angle, and
Mm-hmm.
how the group, as they share what they experience, it's amazing how people will shift and pivot when they have strong men that gives great input, great
Mm-hmm.
perspective, but also invites you to continue to be yourself. That's a check-in itself, and it helps us to balance some of those things. Because I mean, I had when some of the first meetings with some of the young guys, like they texting each other in a fatherhood group, and they like 10 feet from each other.
Right.
And I'm like, man, we gotta put all the phones over here.
Yeah, they're a different breed. I love them. I love their energy. I love everything about them. But you're right. And again, we're gonna go back to this thing about patience and time. You know, even with them, we got to have a level of patience. We got to have a level of grace. You know, and we got to give up some time to like bring them through. I had a guy who runs a group down in Texas who said to me, "Yo, every fatherhood group has to have a Yoda in it. Like, if you ain't got a Yoda in your group, then you ain't really doing this thing right, because somebody's got to bring wisdom to the conversation. Because these kids today and these young dads today, you know, it's probably the third of the last three generations to actually know more than the generation before them because of their access to information. But while they may know more than we know, they don't have more wisdom than we have. And information without wisdom can be very, very dangerous. And so it's still contingent upon us, more seasoned men, to be in the mix of these young cats, to be like, to your point, you know, I used to always, you know, when we were growing up, we always heard this in the community: slow down, little brother, slow down, little brother. And it was like, I'm trying to save you, trying to keep you from hurting yourself, you know, because I've been there, done that. And so we got to get back. You know, there's some things, you know, that we do want to go back in history and time and pull up to where we are now. And there's some things we want to leave back there. We don't want to bring everything, but there's some things we want to bring forward. Kelly, tell everybody how they can get in touch with you and find out more about what you're doing.
Definitely can reach me on www.ui4sf.org. That's the Urban Institute for Strengthening Families. You can find me at Kelly R. Little on LinkedIn, Facebook, Father's Haven, Urban Institute for Strengthening Families, as well as at 704-960-5423. Again, 704-960-5423. Those are Instagram, urban underscore institute underscore the number 4 underscore SF, and embrace underscore your underscore truth. All the places you can find me.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you. Appreciate everything that you bring into the space, man. I count it an honor to be your friend and colleague. I love seeing my brothers excel, you know, and do this work at a high level. And to your point earlier, it's not enough of us, and we don't have enough time, you know, or space to be competing against each other. So I celebrate and scream and yell to the rafters when I see brothers doing great work, you know, in their communities, because as much as we are out here, there are so many other places around this country that don't have us in the mix of them. And we got to figure out a way how to scale and make sure that we're covering all of our bases. So thank you again, bro. I appreciate you. And as my good friend and board chair, Darren Ferguson, Bishop Ferg, always says, I love you and there ain't nothing you can do about it, bro. And so thank you. And to my I Am Dad podcast listeners, thank you for joining us on another episode of I Am Dad podcast. You know how I like to leave you: always be kind to others as you're kind to yourself, or you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And as my good friend and mentor Art Mitchell used to always say to me, it's nice to be important, but you know what? It's much more important to be nice. Until next Sunday, peace out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting IamDadPodcast.com. That's IamDadPodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am Dad, period.